Hi, my name is Adam Hanlon. Welcome to Wetpixel Live. I'd like to introduce you to our regular correspondent and his glamorous assistant, Zizzy. Alex Mustard and Zizzy.
Hey, she's here for all of these. She's a very faithful listener to Wetpixel Live, so I thought she needed another appearance. She wants to go back to her regular seat.
We could get her on as a guest presenter, I think, probably.
She goes underwater more than I do, so she loves diving in the river. So she's real, and she opens her eyes. If you
very cool. So
go on our website and search Zena, Z-E-N-A, you'll find her straight away.
There we are. I have a cat asleep over here, but I don't wake it because it'll attack me. Anyway, today we're going to talk about, perhaps oppositely, fish portraits, animal portraits, but in our case, fish portraits, and specifically some of the equipment and tools that we use to create pictures of portraits of fish. So with that, I'm going to throw it as usual over to Alex and ask him what equipment he uses for fish portraits.
Well, the first thing I would say is that fish are a very diverse group. More than half of the vertebrate species that have been described by scientists in the world are fish.
Wow.
So, just saying, how to photograph, fish. There's not one size fits all. No. Some fish are big, some fish are small, some fish swim about, some fish hang out with friends, some fish stays dead still. So the techniques are a little bit different. I think what I want to focus on in this is not specifically sort of big fish, not specifically fish that sit on the seabed, because I think those are a little bit different, but more how to photograph kind of the typical reef fish swimming about a little bit, which gives us quite a bit of challenge. And I think those are good subjects for us to shoot, because I think a lot of them are a little bit ignored by photographers. We all see butterfly fish and angel fish and surgeon fish and all those guys when we're diving on a coral reef, for example. But we tend to photograph moray eels that don't move and frogfish and hawkfish that don't move. And, and a lot of the time underwater photographers do ignore these very common fish that are all around us. But because they may be a little bit more difficult to shoot, we tend to go after the easier subjects.
Yep.
So I think it's worth talking about the techniques that are good for those fish.
Yep.
So typically we want to look for nice benign diving conditions for shooting fish, because fish photography is something we want to be doing where we've got time, it's easy. So easy, shallow, clear water, not with strong waves or currents. Make things nice and easy for yourself. And ideally go to a dive site that sees a lot of divers. Training sites are the best of fish photography, because the fish there are used to people going around and flapping all over the place. And if you can be the diver who stays really still, really calm, the fish will be really friendly to you. The reason clear water is important is in clearer water, we can shoot fish from a little bit further off. And my favorite lenses for fish photography are the longer lenses out there.
Yep.
Because I think these give you that little bit longer working distance. So rather than on my Nikon camera, rather than using a 60mm macro lens, I'll use a 105mm macro lens. Or I'll quite regularly use this, which is the Sigma 150mm macro lens. F2.8 still focuses really fast. Really, it's a big heavy thing and it's quite expensive. But
on Canon, we're talking probably the 100mm. On Sony, maybe the 90mm. So that sort of focal length, maybe a little bit longer to give it more reach, possibly.
Yeah, and on Micro Four Thirds, the 60mm.
Yeah.
And the reason we're going for those longer lenses is they allow you just to sit off the subject a little bit. If you don't have one of those longer lenses, you can always add a teleconverter to a shorter macro lens to give yourself a little bit more reach. But you'll need to put a port extension in as well. By the time you've paid for those two, you might as well put a longer lens. But I think those things can help. And the reason that helps is it allows you to sit a little bit further back from the subject. The subject is more relaxed. You're more likely to have the fish coming onto the camera, looking good, and behaving well. You also then need to adapt your lighting technique a little bit for this longer standing off distance. And I really like using what I call telephoto lighting, where instead of having my strobes sort of in line with the camera, in line with the port, I'll push them out in front of the camera so that they're closer to the subject than I am. And that reduces the light path to the subject and back to the camera, which gives me more flash on the subject and better colors on the subject. And that's a good way of shooting to keep a bit of distance.
So it's worth kind of just briefly going back to basics on this, in that flash output, remember, is governed by an inverse square law. So for every distance... Sorry?
I said basics.
Basic. Bottom line is light doesn't travel very well through water. So if you've got a subject that's further away, your strobe light, you'll either have to turn the strobes up a lot more, or you move the strobes close to the subject. And what Alex is suggesting here is basically we physically put the strobes out in front of the camera and housing to some extent in order to throw that light forward.
But also, if the strobes are back and they have to travel all the way there and all the way back, the light's going to get really quite cold by the time it's come back, because the warm light will be attenuated out of that through that light path. Whereas if they're up in front of you, they're closer to the subject, and you'll get more warm light on the subject.
Yeah.
The other thing I would do, so in terms of strobes for fish photography, I often don't use diffusers for these types of shots, but I will use those coloured clear diffusers.
Right.
Enon, I know, make a number of them. I know a lot of Enon users have those completely clear diffusers that are quite strongly coloured, and they're great for fish photography because they allow you to get those strobes closer to the subject and get nice warm light on the subject when you're shooting them.
Yeah, the Enon ones are specific Kelvin values, aren't they? They're 4,600, 4,900.
Yeah, but they're pushing the strobe warmer, and that helps you with the light path. Because the longer the strobe goes, the cooler the light will get. And what that does is it helps you get good colour on the subject, but it also gives you a good colour contrast between the subject and the background.
In the background, yeah.
People might say, well, I can just shoot it anyway and white balance it. Yeah, but if you have a blue fish on a blue background and you white balance it, you'll get the colours on the fish, but you'll lose the blue from the background. So making that adjustment to the strobes is really good. You also, I don't think, want really big old strobes for this. You want a rig that's reasonably manageable. But you do want quite good buoyancy, because when I shoot macro, I'm quite happy to dive with a negatively buoyant rig. When I do fish portraits, I actually want a neutrally buoyant rig. So I will put on, good long arms with good floats on them, so that rig is reasonably comfortable in the water, particularly when it's stretched out like a great big crab or something. I want it to sit comfortably in the water, have a nice, so it'll sit relatively flat and relatively comfortably in the water.
Basically, you don't want to be fighting that tilting urge that you get otherwise. It wants to be stable.
Heavy lenses like this, it can really get quite nose heavy. So you want to get those strobes out. Maybe use some of the Popeye arms at the end. Can help things. Buoyancy collars as well. They can be really good for this type of photography.
So a tip for this sort of thing, if you have the opportunity, for example, if you're doing a land-based trip and you're planning to set your camera up for this particular technique, get in the pool with your camera and play around with some of the buoyancy arms and their positions, or the floats, however you're planning to offset the negative buoyancy, and get it right before you get in the water. I mean, obviously you can adjust it in the water; it's not fixed, but get it at least kind of 3/4 of the way there before you even venture out on the boat or wherever it is you're going diving. It's a quick fix and much easier to do somewhere like a pool, somewhere like that, than it is to do once you're out at sea. And
I think it's good to think like that as a photographer with your gear. When we do, when we dive in different conditions around the world, we change our weights. When I wear a thick wetsuit, a thin wetsuit, a rash vest, I change my weights. And I think it's good to think about that with your camera rig, in that your camera rig, for different types of shots, you may want to not only be set up differently, but to have different buoyancy, to make it comfortable to shoot. All those things can help you push that a little bit further to get that standout shot.
Sure.
The final thing I want to talk about is autofocus. Generally, I like to use a single point autofocus for a swimming fish, but one with a tracking function. So you can put that single point on the fish and it will help track around. The fish will be moving, and if you're floating, you're likely to be moving a little bit. And I think that will help you get the autofocus. And that's got different names in different cameras, but they all have some sort of tracking autofocus based around a single point. They're often developed for sports photography, but they're really good for fish photography as well. And then that's really the main thing. I think the one thing I wanted to say is one of the things this is an old book on underwater photography called Mastering Underwater Photography by Carl Rossler, who was a fantastic travel writer, traveler, tour operator, and an underwater photographer from the 70s, 80s, maybe just into the 90s. And he was a great fish photographer, and he describes fish photography, fish portraiture, as the ultimate skill for underwater photographers.
There you go.
Shooting big stuff is relatively easy in his mind, but really capturing those fish portraiture challenges you on so many levels, because you're dealing with subjects. Some of the tips that he gives I thought were worth a quick reading out. He's talks a lot about pacing yourself. You're working with wild subjects. Don't force the issue. He talks about the undisturbed reef, as in go become part of the environment, don't damage places. Evaluate the terrain, where can you hide, where can you work. Try to keep the fish subjects relaxed. Make sure you've got the technical stuff in your brain beforehand, so that when you're in the face of the subject, you're not fiddling around with everything.
Yeah.
And the same with your lighting as well.
Yeah.
You want to get tuned in before you're moving in on the subject.
So find a rock, find something, line it up, get your exposure right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're making minimal changes, and then you're just focusing on getting the subject prime in focus and getting that really good pose.
Yeah.
Because it's the pose that will transform these shots.
Yeah.
You know, a fish just, is just a fish.
Yeah.
But if you capture a movement, a suggestion of shape,
yeah.
suddenly the picture becomes beautiful to look at. You can get the character of the subject coming through with great eye contact.
Yeah.
And you end up with a really strong image, not just there's a fish that no one's interested in.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is the key to the technique.
I think something that I often see photographers do, which I think is a mistake, is reviewing too frequently as well, particularly when we're shooting fish portraits. In that, once you've got a fish that is interacting, that's behaving, that you're getting the shots in the bag, the worst thing you can do is then drop the camera, have a look, see what you're getting on the viewfinder. Keep shooting. You can look at the pictures later. Get your exposure and everything else dialed in beforehand with a rock or whatever, and then once you've got a subject in the frame, just keep shooting. And actually, I don't image review until I've lost the subject, basically.
Yeah, it's a really nice point there. And I'd say what I do is I'll often be shooting, and I shoot a lot of verticals when fish portrait shooting, and then I'll just look to the side and look at my LCD screen. I can't see if it's sharp on the LCD screen with just looking like that, but I can see if the exposure is right.
Yeah.
And I know it's sharp because I knew it was sharp when I took the picture.
Yeah.
So I don't need to review properly. I'm just looking at the corner of my eye at my LCD screen when the pictures flash up. And I always have my camera set to flash my pictures up as I shoot them.
Yeah.
I never have to press the review button.
Yeah.
And if I don't want them to flash up, I just tap the shutter and they don't flash up.
Yeah.
And that way I can just keep out the corner of my eye, make sure my exposures are close enough, and then I can just keep shooting. And especially when the rig is out in front of you, you start moving it around to review. You're swiping a massive great thing through the wall. Well,
the point is that a subject is, we're dealing here with subjects that will move away quite rapidly when we do something strange, and dropping the camera with the subject's gone. Plus, then of course you've got all the problems reacquiring the subject if it does hang around. So in general, get the shots in the bag. Once the subject moves away, or you've had enough of shooting it, then back away if possible and review some distance away. I think over reviewing is we're all prone to take a picture thinking, it's going to be really good, so we want to see it immediately. And unfortunately, then the next shot might be even better, but we didn't get it because we were busy looking at the LCD screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I took a picture of Isa, my daughter, yesterday. She was photographing deer in the park with a phone. And the first picture, I've got a really nice one of her I was just a few meters behind, holding the phone up, taking a picture of the deer. It's quite a long way away. And then the second picture, she's chimping her picture, looking down at it.
So I was going to mention that, because I think chimping may be a phrase. I know every time I try so people say we call it chimping. Why do we call it chimping, Alex?
I don't remember now. I remember when it first came out.
I know this. So the reason is because people go and they go, ooh, 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 ooh. That's what they've got on the screen. Hence chimping. No way, I digress. Thank you, Alex. Lots of good information. Alex has a beautiful assortment of fish portraits on his website, so at amustard.com. I doubt that they're browsable by keyword.
Actually, portrait. I use the word portrait quite often to describe that type of shot. So it will come up in the image caption. I'll say portrait of a, this, that, and the other. So yeah, portrait's a good search word.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we'll find them there. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's episode, which is Nauticam. Thank them very much for sponsoring the episode. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to give it a like if you enjoyed it or found the content valuable, and feel free to add comments and suggestions to the comments box below. Thanks very much. All the best, and see you again soon.